This lesson deals with transformations. We're going to talk about reflections over the X and Y axis. So looking at the first graph we have, it says we're going to be reflecting over the x-axis. So I've highlighted the x-axis here for you. So that's going to be our focal point. If we're reflecting a point over the x-axis, the other point must be the exact same distance from the x-axis. So here I see I have point A, and it is 2 spaces off of the x-axis. So to be a reflection, we're going to go 2 spaces down, and I am putting a point here. And when we name it A prime. That means that this is your original point, but this was the new point that was reflected. And you're able to actually, if you fold this graph in half, those points would be right on top of each other. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to mark one. I think right here, and I am going to call it point C. So I can see that point C is only 1 off of the x-axis. So from the x-axis, I am going to go 1 down, and that will be my C prime. Again, folding it, we have them exactly in the same position. So looking at, let's go back to A, the ordered pair for A was at a 4 and a 2. So A is 4 and 2. And A prime, that's the new point that was reflected over the x-axis, is 4 and -2. So we're going to be looking for a rule for this that's going to make it easy to remember. Well, I'm seeing that, well, guess what? The X's are the same. But what do you notice about the Y's? They are opposites. So for the rule of being able to know if it's reflected over the x-axis, we know when we are comparing our 2 points that the X will stay the same and the Y is the opposite. Okay, so now let's look at reflecting over the y-axis. Well, I see I have a B all the way down here, and I'm going to write that B point, and I think I'll write it right over here so we actually have room. That is at a -3 and a -2. So B was a -3 for X and a -2. And this is our X. We know this is our Y. So now notice here is the y-axis. When we reflect over the y-axis, the point has to be the same distance from where letter B was. So it's 1, 2, 3 spaces. So it's 1, 2, 3 spaces right here. So that will be our B prime. And now when I'm looking for my ordered pairs, here's my B prime. I see that I have X is a 3 and Y is a -2. All right, well, let's check out one more point so we can see if we see the pattern. I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a point right here. Again, we want to make sure, and I'm going to call that point D. We want to make sure point D is the D prime, the new point, the reflection is equal distance from the y-axis. So I'm going here and I am going straight across just 1 space, and this is my D prime. So our ordered pair for our, and I'll write it up here, for our letter D was a 1 and a 2. So X was 1, Y is 2. Always X first, Y second. And our D prime was where X was a -1 and Y was a 2. X was a -1 and Y was a 2. So do you see a pattern? With this one, I see when it's reflected over the y-axis, the y's actually stayed the same. But notice what happened to our x's. our x's actually went ahead and they became opposites. And we can double check this one. Notice our y's are the same, our x's are opposites. So for the rule that we're going to remember for reflection over the y-axis, we're going to say that the y stays the same, but the x is the opposite. So just an easy way that I remember it, if I'm reflecting over the y-axis, notice my y stays the same. If I'm reflecting over the x-axis, notice my x stayed the same. And then the other two were just opposites. So now we're going to try to identify whether the point has been reflected over the x or y axis. This is our beginning point, t. T prime is our reflection point. So we go from a 6, -2 to a -6, -2. Well, the first thing I want to notice is I notice that my y's are the same. And after that, I am looking at my x's and they're the opposites. So let's go back up to our rules. The y stays the same and x is the opposite. We know this is over the y-axis, reflected over the y-axis. All right, let's look at u. We have a 4 and a -1, and u prime, the point that's reflected, is a 4 and a 1. Again, notice the x stayed the same, and the y is the opposite. So when the x stays the same and the y is the opposite, we are reflecting, again, over the x-axis. It's really easy when you have a pair of points and you just see which one's the same. That's where it's being reflected over. All right, wow, v is dealing with fractions. So again, I have v is 1/2 and -3/4. V prime, the new point, is -1/2 and -3/4. Again, I see the y stays the same, so that's over the y-axis. And the x is a pair of opposites. So for y, I have a 5 and a -7, and not y, w, a 5 and a -7, and w prime is a -5, -7. Again, I'm finding where does it stay the same? It stays the same for the y, so we know that it is reflected over the y-axis. And just to double check, you can see that the x is a pair of opposites. Transformations, reflections over the x and y axis. If this video was helpful to you today, please add a like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more Math with Marsha. See you again soon.